This is the next lesson in Paper 3 Germany. Now this is for Unit 1, and this lesson is really important to look at how Germany went through a period of prosperity. How Germany went through a period that historians describe as the Golden Years. So the title for today's lesson will be Stresemann, How Golden Were the Golden Years, 1924 to 1929. Now the outcomes of this lesson will be to describe the problems Germany was facing in 1923, explain the policies that Stresemann introduced to improve the situation, and evaluate the weaknesses of Stresemann's policies. And some of the key words that we're going to come across today are Stresemann, Dawes, Young, and League of Nations. Now your first task is to pause this video and just work out what these 6 pictures represent in regards to the problems that Germany were facing by 1923. Don't forget that after the war was ended in 1918, that a new democratic government came to Germany. This government was known as the Weimar Republic. So pause the video here and make a spider diagram of all the problems that Germany were facing by 1923. This should take you roughly about 5 minutes. Right, so let's see what problems that you had. So firstly, the Treaty of Versailles. The government had stabbed people in the back. The Versailles Treaty punished Germany for their part in the First World War. The new government themselves were seen as November criminals. Now the reason we say they are November criminals is because the armistice which ended the fighting of the First World War was signed in November. As previously mentioned, the Treaty of Versailles crippled German economy and military. And if you're unsure of how it did that, look back on the prior video on how the Treaty of Versailles made Germans angry. The left wing and the right wing were attempting to overthrow the newly democratic government. So the left wing in 1919 with the Spartacist uprising, and in 1920 the Kapp Putsch. But you also had many different political assassinations, with roughly 370 between the years 1919 to 1921. You had the occupation of the Ruhr, which meant that Germany had no real money coming in, which led to currency becoming worthless, people turning on the government, and Germany on the verge of bankruptcy. So this is a position where Germany were in a lot of bother. This is where the key individual for today's lesson comes in. Don't stress her, this will be your man. Stresemann. Now this individual causes a lot of discussion in history. Why? Well, some historians see him as a hero. Others say that he papered over the cracks and he made Germany dance on a volcano. So your next task, just ignore the fact there's 2 on this slide. Your next task is to copy out the information here and fill in the correct word. So it says, Stresemann was the blank of Germany in 1923. He did not last long in this role. In 1924, he was made blank minister. His main role was to develop the blank of Germany, who were in an awful position. Stresemann's main job was to strengthen blank and blank policy. So Germany gained more blank. This way he hoped to unite Germans behind blank parties and reduce the power of the blank. The period of 1924 to 29 was known as the blank years, and there are 2 viewpoints of Stresemann. He was a blank and saved Germany, and he blanked over the cracks and made Germany dance on a blank. And the key words here are golden, chancellor, strength, economic, moderate, extreme, foreign, respect, foreign again, papered, volcano, hero. Pause the video here, copy out this close exercise with the subtitle, Who was Stresemann? And then fill in the gaps. Spend about 5 minutes on this task, and when you're done, unpause the video and I will go through the answers. Right, so the answers for this task. Stresemann was the Chancellor. Now what I'll do after each one is I'll tick it. Stresemann was the Chancellor of Germany in 1923. He did not last long in this role, and in 1924 he was made foreign minister. His main role was to develop the strength of Germany, who were in an awful position. Stresemann's main role was to strengthen economic and foreign policy. So Germany gained more respect. This way he hoped to unite the Germans behind moderate parties and reduce the power of the extreme parties. The period of 24 to 29 was known as the Golden Years. There are two viewpoints of Stresemann: that he was a hero and saved Germany, and he papered over the cracks and made Germany dance on a volcano. So, that's who Stresemann was. He was a very important individual. Now, if you're not sure what foreign and economic policy means, foreign policy means making friends, gaining more relationships with the other countries around you. And economic policy means getting Germany more money, which at this stage they desperately needed. Now the next task is to look at a range of policies that Stresemann introduced, and to look at the positives and the negatives. So the policies we're going to look at: 1923, calling off passive resistance and creation of the Rentenmark, which is an economic policy. In 1924 we look at the Dawes Plan, which is an economic policy. In 25 we look at the Locarno Pact, which is a foreign policy. In 26 we look at Germany joining the League of Nations, which was a foreign policy. In 28 Germany signing the Kellogg-Briand Pact, which is a foreign policy. And in 1929 the Young Plan, which is an economic policy. So I'm going to go through each one, and as I'm going through these, you need to create a positive and negative. So actually the best thing to do for this task is summarise what it did, and then write what was good about it and what was bad about it. So in 1923, Stresemann called off passive resistance. Now the passive resistance was a strike in the Ruhr. Stresemann told the workers to continue working, making an agreement with France and Belgium to end the occupation. This meant Germany could make money again, which ended the hyperinflation crisis. Now this is good because Germany have got money coming back into the Ruhr. They are also building a positive relationship with France and Belgium, but at the same time German people would be angry that France and Belgium, that Germany were working with what seemingly is the enemy. Calling off passive resistance is also really important, and it helps the second thing we're going to look at, the creation of the Rentenmark. Now the Rentenmark is a currency, a new currency. And this was introduced on the 15th of October 1923. It was introduced in an attempt to stop the hyperinflation crisis that had crippled German economy and made money totally invaluable. This was good, a good move for Stresemann, as money became worthwhile again and prices began to go down. But many people were still furious about the hyperinflation crisis. Mainly the middle class, who lost all of their savings but didn't get any back. Pensioners, who were forced to be on a fixed amount over the hyperinflation crisis. Now people could trade in their old money, but it was an exchange rate of 1 billion marks for one Rentenmark, which meant that many Germans felt cheated, that they weren't being compensated. So with that, write down the positives and the negatives. At the end of these four, pause the video and then create positives and negatives for each. In 1924 you had the Dawes Plan. Germany was lent 800 million marks by America so they could invest in new schools, hospitals and buildings, which effectively built Germany's infrastructure. This also meant that Germany could pay the reparation payments which caused issues in 1923. But if America asked for this money back, then Germany would have to pay it all back. So Germany are relying on America. Germany are not self-sufficient. They're not looking after themselves. They are relying on America to help them build their infrastructure. Furthermore, in 1925, Germany signed the Locarno Pact. Stresemann oversaw the signing of this treaty, and it was a promise from France and Belgium that they would not invade Germany in a time of crisis, which secures Germany's border, which means there is not going to be a repeat of the Ruhr crisis of 1923. But the east of Germany was still at risk, and people of Germany did not agree with their country bargaining with the enemy. So there was still a threat from Russia and the sweeping communism, which started in 1917 after the Communist Revolution. Now the best thing to do here is to pause the video and make a positive and negative for each one of these policies: calling off passive resistance, the Rentenmark, Dawes Plan and the Locarno Pact. And once you've done that, unpause the video and start with the rest of the policies. Right, the next policies, we've got 3 more left. So in 1926, Germany joined the League of Nations, which was a group of countries that aimed to discuss their issues instead of going to war. So it was basically like a political group chat to make sure that there wasn't any issues and there weren't the same repeat as World War I. So Stresemann ensured that Germany joined the League of Nations, which Germany were banned from doing in 1919 after signing the treaty. This made Germany equal. It gave them power back as they were given a permanent seat alongside countries such as Britain and France. Germany had the power to bring up any concerns on a European scale, while they also had the power to veto, which means disagree with the other countries. For German strength this was great, but people of Germany believed they were being betrayed because Germany were now technically equal and joining forces with the same countries who put the Treaty of Versailles in place. And many people felt like the German government were betraying their trust. In 1928 you also had the Kellogg-Briand Pact, and it was an agreement between Germany and 62 other countries that said that during a time of crisis or anger, war would not be used. Now obviously we know that by 1939 there was another world war, but what this allowed Germany to do was to rebuild, rearm and make sure that their economy was going to be stronger, so that if there was another war they would be prepared for it. However, they couldn't rebuild their military too much because of the restrictions of the Treaty of Versailles. And in 1929 the last economic policy was the Young Plan. Now this was an agreement that lowered the reparation payments by 2/3 of the original amount. It also allowed Germany to have a longer to pay until 1989. The problem with this is that a lot of Germans believed that paying the reparations shouldn't have been happening, so it caused anger and resentment. Furthermore, Germany were allowed control back of the Rhineland, which was a bonus because under the Treaty of Versailles the Rhineland had to be demilitarised. Germany having control of the Rhineland ensured that the threat of France was kept to a very small, it was a minimum basically. These are the last 3 policies that Stresemann introduced, and I advise you pause the video here and you write positives and negatives of each one of these policies. Now your final task of this lesson is to decide, did Stresemann's policies actually work? Now I'm going to put a list of statements. You need to create basically a judgment line. Yes on one side, no on another. In the middle you're looking at 50-50. You need to draw this and put the evidence that I'm about to put on the next slide across this judgment line, judging whether Stresemann was a hero or whether he made Germany paper over the cracks and dance on a volcano. These are the statements. The number of people voting for extreme parties went down from 40 to 28%. The number of people voting for moderate parties went up from 50 to 58%. Germany was still relying on other countries for their money. Politics were more stable, especially after Ebert died in 1925. Stresemann began to get support of the middle and upper class. All it took was for America to have an issue and then Germany would be verging bankruptcy again. The government didn't change as much during the years 24 to 29. Some German people were furious with Stresemann because he aligned himself with the enemy, and the economy had improved, and by 1929 there was a new wave of culture which showed off money, happiness, and a shift in the old German way of life. Now, where are we going to put these? So, roughly, number of people voting for extreme groups, that is going to be that he was a success. The fact that extreme parties were not being voted for takes pressure off the government. However, 28% is still a slightly, I'd say moderately high number. Moderate parties went up from 50 to 58%. This shows that he was a success. Again, people might argue that it wasn't a massive amount, so you might not put him at the very end of your judgment line. You might put him lingering the left side, just not extreme yes. Germany was relying on other countries for their money. That suggests that Stresemann did not work, because if something went wrong in America, there's problems. Politics were more stable, yes. Was that fully because of Stresemann? Some people argue it was because of the death of Ebert in 1925. Stresemann began to get support of the middle and upper class, yes, but I can't stress enough, it was only some support because some were still angry at losing their money during the hyperinflation crisis. All it took was for America to have an issue? No, that suggests they did not work. The government changing a lot less? Yes, that did work. If the government changes a lot less, there's going to be more stability, which means a confident and a stronger country. Some German people were furious that Stresemann aligned himself with the enemy. That suggests it didn't work because he aligned himself with France, Britain, the USA. And the German economy had improved. This is a big yes. Germany went through a period of prosperity, which is really significant. So the last thing you can do to finish off this lesson is write a small paragraph. Was Stresemann indeed a hero, or was he an individual that papered over the cracks? Write a peel paragraph which finishes off using examples from all the policies we've looked at in today's lesson.